I'm Lou Rosenfeld, your host and moderator for today's webcast with Deb Gelman. I'm an O'Reilly author, having co-written the Polar Bear book, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web with Peter Morville. I'm also a publisher. My company, Rosenfeld Media, is known for its books on user experience design, and we've been an O'Reilly media partner for many years. We're proud to have published Deb's book, Design for Kids, Digital Products for Playing and Learning, which is our 21st title. It just came out last week, and you can purchase the book's digital versions this week at 50% off directly from O'Reilly. In fact, all of our books are 50% off through O'Reilly. That is the digital versions, and at the O'Reilly site, you can use code W, C as in Charlie, Y as in yellow, A, Z as in zebra. But on to today's talk and speaker. Deb Gelman will be talking with you about what designing for kids can teach us about user experience. Deb's a researcher, a designer, and strategist in the field of interactive children's media. She creates sites, apps, and virtual worlds for such clients as PBS Kids Sprout, Scholastic, Crayola, Pepperidge Farm, Campbell's Soup, and Georgia Public Television. Deb led the research and design of Planet Orange, a site designed to teach 1st through 6th graders financial literacy, which won a USA Today Education Best Bet Award. Today, Deb will explore how learning to design for kids can also help us design better for adults. While designing for adults, we often fixate on the destination, the completion of key tasks. Designing for kids is more often focused on the journey. Can we bring the adventure and excitement of those journeys to design for adults? Deb thinks so, and she'll cover 5 techniques that you'll find valuable whether you're designing for kids or for adults. I'll turn the program over to Deb in just a moment, but first I'd like to go over a few housekeeping things to help you get the most out of today's webcast. You'll want to open the group chat widget if you haven't already done so. This is where we'll interact with each other during the event and where you'll submit your questions for Deb. Our audience usually has a lot of great knowledge to share, so we encourage you to chat freely during the event. However, if you have questions for Deb, please preface them with a capital letter Q so we'll know it's for her and we can make sure to see it for the Q&A part of today's webcast. You can also open, move, and resize any of the other widgets. If you'd like to tweet from the Twitter widget, you'll need to give it permission to access your account. Our hashtag today is Design4Kids. That's all one word with the number 4, Design4Kids. And the Twitter widget will automatically append that to your tweets, so you don't have to. We're recording today's webcast, and we'll have the archive ready, usually in about 48 hours. I'll now turn the program over to Deb for a presentation. Hey, Deb.
Hey, Lou. Thank you so much. I am excited to be here today. Let's go ahead and jump into our topic. In the past couple of years, designing for both kids and adults, I've seen something really interesting happen. I've seen some of the patterns and techniques we use when designing for kids creep into the designs that we intend for adult audiences. And these designs are among the most engaging, most exciting, and most disruptive experiences out there. These are the ones that win awards and get written about in Wired and Fast Company. And it got me thinking, what other patterns that we use for kids could we start incorporating into our designs for adults to increase satisfaction, engagement, and joy? And where is this happening currently? Today we're going to cover what I think are the most important and most applicable principles from designing for kids that we can apply to designing for adults. But before we begin, let's get a quick refresher on how to design for these two audiences. So how do we design for adults? When designing for adults, as Lou was saying earlier, user experience is about getting users from point A to point B and getting out of the way. How many times have you heard, the interface should be seamless, it should be transparent, or my favorite, the best interface is no interface at all. Let's take a look at Google Maps for an example of this seamless interface. Here's the route from my house to work. It's the most direct route, but it takes into consideration my constraints. For example, that I can't levitate and fly there, that I'm driving in a car, etc. It understands my goals and gets me to my ultimate destination as quickly as possible. It's not pointing out the cool antique shop on the corner, and it's not showing me what kind of fish are in the Schuylkill River over here. It gets me where I need to go, and it gets out of my way. Designing for kids is a little different. Let's take a look. For adults, as we discussed, the interface is a means to an end, a way to accomplish a goal. For kids, the interface is the goal. I mean, look at this. There's a treasure here somewhere, but I'd much rather check out Parrot Haven or Smuggler's Cove. If I'm a kid, I am way more interested in the journey than the destination. Now, if I'm an adult and I'm looking to find that treasure, this map would make me so mad. But like we said earlier, there are some concepts here that can make adult experiences more interesting and engaging, still focusing on that destination, of course, but leading to greater satisfaction and delight. So how do we do that? Let's look at some key principles we use when designing for kids. Before we get too much further, it's important to note that the biggest challenge we face when designing for kids is that they change really quickly. A 3-year-old has completely different needs than a 5-year-old or even a 4-year-old. But there are certain concepts that are relevant to all kids under the age of 12, which is when kids pretty much become cognitive adults. These principles are friction, response, investment, action, and flow. Let's take a look. Kids love conflict or friction. Working to solve little problems on a micro level is super rewarding for them. It's a compelling concept for adults too, but very few sites or apps make use of it. For example, I love to pull weeds out of my front lawn. You give that weed a little tug, and that brief moment of friction makes pulling that weed out so rewarding. The same is true for almost any activity that you do with your hands. Car repair, needlepoint, woodworking. And the same is true for interfaces. A little bit of friction helps make the action feel more rewarding and makes the result more satisfying. Let's take a look at some examples, one from the world of kids design and then an example from the world of adult design. Here's an example from the good folks at Toca Boca. Toca Boca is one of my favorite companies producing apps for kids today. In fact, they don't really create apps. They create what they call digital toys. I had the opportunity to speak to Emil Omovar, who's one of the company's founders, and he told me that friction is a key component of all the apps they make. Let's check out a video of Toca House, where kids get to clean and maintain an awesomely crazy-looking house. In this video, watch the friction involved as the character cleans the floor. My daughter is 5 years old. She calls this character Grandma Hat for some reason. See how she's sweeping the floor and the user has to drag her back and forth a few times? It's not like you're just pushing a button and having the dirt disappear. There's actual friction, actual conflict involved. And then when you complete the task, your character gets a little victory dance. Did you notice how it took multiple swipes? The game is all the more exciting and fun because of that little bit of friction involved in accomplishing the task. So how can we apply this principle to adult audiences? Let's take a look at an app currently doing that. I don't know if you're familiar with Rise or not, but it's an alarm clock app that cleverly integrates the idea of fiction to make the overall experience more engaging. We're going to take a look at a quick video. Check out how the user sets the time and turns the alarm on and off. The designers could have provided a basic number entry mechanism, but this entirely gesture-based and mobile-optimized interface uses just the right amount of friction to make this simple alarm clock app even more usable and interesting. There's audio here as well. Hopefully you can hear it. If not, you'll get the gist. See how the user drags to change the time instead of just entering numbers in an interface, swiping, just the right amount of friction to make the experience feel interesting and exciting. It's important to know that using the concept of friction and many of the concepts that we're going to talk about today doesn't always produce the simplest or easiest or most straightforward interactions. Users need to work a tiny bit harder to get the app to do what they want it to do, but that little bit of extra work can lead to higher satisfaction. There are some types of interaction that lend themselves better to friction than others. Let's take a look. Some experiences for grown-ups that can benefit from friction involve information seeking. When users are looking for news, weather, sports, recipes, etc., a little friction at the beginning of the experience can make the discovery more fun. I realize that you can't see the slide right now, so I'm loading it up. Here we go. So we just talked about information seeking again. That discovery, that aspiration to find a key piece of information, throwing a little bit of friction there can make that more interesting. Another type of experience that lends itself well to the idea of friction is compiling or collecting, adding stuff to lists. So things like TV shows, real estate listings, music, playlists, etc. When you're adding stuff to lists, a little bit of friction can make that feel very interesting. It makes the boring concept of saving, storing, and sharing a little bit more exciting. Another opportunity for using friction in experiences designed for adult audiences is commerce. Think about the last time you bought anything online. How did you find the act of selecting a color, selecting a quantity, or selecting a size and placing an item in your cart? It probably was pretty routine, but not very exciting. Think about ways that you could use friction to make it more interesting and more compelling for users to add things to their carts, for users to make the selections for the individual products that they're looking to purchase. It's important to note there, if you are going to be using friction as part of an e-commerce experience, you want to make sure that you test it out. That's the same is true for all of the app types that we talked about. But when you're designing a commerce app, you want to make sure that you have the right amount of friction because too much may impact your conversion, and I'm sure that's a risk that you do not want to take. I know that my e-commerce clients do not want to take that risk. So what type of interface might be harmed by the addition of friction? Anything in the banking or financial services industries. When people are dealing with their money, they want things to be streamlined, quick, error-free, and straightforward. Anything financial carries too much risk for people to feel comfortable with any type of friction within the experience. Moving on to our next principle, we're going to look at the idea of response. When designing for kids under 12, it's important to make sure that everything you create responds to a child's every action. Kids need to know that what they're doing within an interface actually does something. So you won't see a whole lot of routine data entry and submit buttons in kids' design. Instead, you'll see some really interesting action and response mechanisms that help the child build a give and take relationship with the interface and the product. Sometimes with adults, we err on the side of transparency and we limit feedback and response so as to not annoy our users. Granted, it's a balancing act because you don't want to draw too much attention to the interface itself, and you don't want to take away from the task users are trying to complete. But a little real-time response can be very compelling for adult audiences. Let's take a look at some examples. The first example we're going to look at is from a game called Where's My Water? This is a Disney game that teaches kids complex physics principles. You have to dig through dirt, as we'll see in a moment, to channel the water to Swampy, who is this alligator on the screen. He needs to take a bath to get ready for a date with his lady alligator friend. Everything kids do in this interface provides visual feedback, which helps kids learn how to play the game. The nice thing about Where's My Water is that it doesn't hit you over the head with feedback. Some kids' apps play ridiculous music whenever a child does anything right, and it throws big messages like, great job, or try again, over and over and over again. But Where's My Water is more subtle, and by being more subtle, it can be better integrated into the experience. Let's take a look. You'll notice in the video that this is a video of me playing the game, whenever I dig in the dirt, you'll see that dirt crumbs fly, and everything I touch gives me some kind of response. Watch how the water flows around the paths that I create. There's my Swampy character. He's happy because he's nice and clean now. This level of response and detail is perfect because it lets kids who haven't fully learned cause and effect see the outcome of their behavior in a meaningful way. Thinking about examples for adults, we can look at the site OkCupid. This is a dating site with some pretty progressive design and UX techniques. The user responds here in a much more subtle way to make people feel important and recognized. Online dating can be a very daunting proposition, but the familiar approach that OkCupid takes helps make its users feel more comfortable. Let's take a look. So check out this screenshot. You'll see it's a pretty typical looking form, but when I enter my information, it responds in a friendly and a familiar way. So here's the screenshot. I'm going to zoom in here on the part where I enter my zip code. And what you'll see, and hopefully it will be clear, is that after I entered my zip code, it pinpointed where I live, and it says, Bluebell, because it knows that I live in Bluebell, Pennsylvania. We'll wait until that the zoom in appears, and you'll see. There you go. I put in my zip code, and it knows, and it gives me the little check mark. It's not in my face. It's not obnoxious. It's not that creepy. And it provides just the right amount of response to help me feel engaged and motivated to continue. So let's take a look at some ways that we could use response effectively when designing experience for grown-ups. And let's take a look at some types of experiences that we can use response in a meaningful way. So like we just saw in OkCupid, forms are a great way to incorporate the idea of response. Ideally, you would be using this for short forms to show that users entered information in the right way and that the system recognizes the correct entry of information. With longer forms, you might want to just place a subtle check mark next to each field just so users know they did it right. You don't want to hit them over the head with it. If users are concentrating on filling out a form, you don't want to make the response too overwhelming. Another opportunity for using response is repetitive tasks. It's funny, I was just approving some timesheets the other day, and I'm thinking, gosh, this is so boring. I'm checking them, I'm approving them. If there had been a little bit of response, again, not too in your face, but a little bit of response letting me know that it was recording my actions in a fun and interesting way, it would have made that task of approving timesheets a little bit more interesting. Another example is if you are designing something that's allowing users to upload or download something. Users like to have a little bit of feedback when they have uploaded something or downloaded something to show them that they've done it correctly. And you can be creative with this and think of interesting ways to include this level of response with these types of apps, because usually when people are uploading or downloading something, they're doing it obviously for a specific reason, and showing them that you've accepted their upload or processed their download and helping them feel as though it was a fun process is a really good way to use response. As far as opportunities or experiences that you might not want to include response would be anything requiring a spreadsheet or a calculation or reporting. For example, every time you add a line of data to a spreadsheet or a document, you don't need that level of response. For example, the other day I was doing an expense report, and if it gave me feedback every time I entered a number or every time I changed anything, I think I might have smashed my computer. But when I'm approving expense reports, I like to have that little bit of response. A little bit of response is good and helpful. Moving on to our next topic, or our next principle, is the idea of investment. Investment is a very important concept when designing for kids. If they're going to spend time using your site or your app, they expect to get some sort of reward above and beyond the basic goal of that site or app. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. So one of my favorite words is lagniappe. Lagniappe is a small gift given to a customer by a merchant at the time of purchase, something that is given or obtained gratuitously or by way of good measure. This is our dictionary definition of the word lagniappe. Really, it means a little something extra, like a baker's dozen. If you go in and buy 12 donuts, you'll get a 13th one free. The way we can apply this concept of the lagniappe to digital experiences is by hiding an Easter egg or some little reward into the system to thank the users for their participation. And kids, in fact, expect this. They expect their investment to garner them a lagniappe as a reward. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. And I'm going to apologize in advance for this example because it's probably the most annoying app there is. It's an app called Talking Carl, and basically it repeats back whatever you say to it in a really annoying voice. The nice thing about Talking Carl is that it does include some lagniappes to invite people to play with it and to reward users for taking the time to interact with it. My 5-year-old will play with this over and over and over again just to see the way Carl responds when she's not speaking to it, and just to click on the little button to see what surprise, funny thing that he will do. Let's go ahead and take a look. This one, if it doesn't have audio, you'll be able to tell what's going on from the image. So notice when I push the button in the top, he'll surprise me with some crazy action. And I never know what that action is going to be. That's almost like a little lagniappe button there that gets him to do something crazy and unexpected. And then when I feed him the bone, he always does something different. So whether it's jumping up in the air or burping or dropping down to the ground, there's always a little surprise with Talking Carl. Now we're going to look at an example that's near and dear to all of our hearts, the Google Doodle. People don't come to Google specifically for the treat that is the Google Doodle, although that may not be the case anymore, and people may come just to look and see what's going on their site. But this is a perfect example of reward for investment. And my favorite is this Pac-Man one, celebrating the 30th anniversary of Pac-Man. It's a great example of how little surprises work to celebrate investment, which is a powerful concept for kids and adults alike. And what I love about this one is that it's an actual working game. I'm trying to show you how it would play. Hopefully you can see my screen, but you click Insert Coin. I'm not very good at Pac-Man. And then if you can see what I'm doing, I'm just controlling that little Pac-Man guy with my arrow keys. And I'm totally going to lose, but that's okay. So the fact that there's an actual game rolled into the interface, even though users are coming not to play a game, but they're coming to do a search or find something that they're looking for, is a pretty compelling lagniappe. So again, like everything else that we've talked about today, there are ways to use the concept of investment more wisely for an adult audience. You wouldn't use it to the same level that you would see in an app like Talking Carl. So let's take a look at what some of those opportunities might be. It's important to remember, like we just discussed, that the rewards you provide for investment cannot get in the way of the main user task, but should enhance and support them. A great opportunity for using investment is social media. People spend a lot of time with community sites and apps, and throwing in little Easter eggs makes the experience a little bit more rewarding and fun. For example, in Facebook, I just discovered this recently, if you go in and change your language preference, you have many, many options other than standard world languages. For example, one of the options that you have is English pirate. And if you select that, it'll change your entire Facebook interface to be in pirate language. It's very funny for about 4.5 seconds, and then you're ready to go back to whatever your base language is. Another opportunity for incorporating this idea of investment and reward and lagniappe is communication. Any type of messaging or communication interface is an effective place for this. For example, MailChimp has a lot of these in its templates, and you can also use this idea of investment when you're crafting error messaging or system messaging for your users, regardless of what the system is that you're designing or the experience. Finally, a great opportunity for integrating investment is routine enterprise tasks. Again, back to the timesheets, time off requests, expense reports, etc. Those routine, mundane, enterprise-level tasks that we do as part of our daily responsibilities can really, users can be more likely to engage with them appropriately and enjoy the time they spend doing them if you throw in some of those little investment opportunities, throw in some of those little lagniappes. And it's a nice way to thank people in your company or the company that you're designing for, to thank them for using what it is that you've designed, which is very nice. So when wouldn't you use this concept of the lagniappe or the Easter egg from an investment perspective? If you're designing anything medical or anything for a pharmaceutical company, for example, if someone's researching a medication or some type of serious condition, you don't want to hide a lagniappe in the interface because chances are they're not in the mood for fun, they're not in the mood to be rewarded, they want to get their information and get out. So I would caution you, if you are designing something, particularly if you're designing information or a pharmaceutical page for a serious condition, you don't want to get too involved with the reward and lagniappe Easter egg model. Moving right along to our next topic, which is action. So many animals in the world only will eat things that are alive and moving because they know that these things are fresh. Well, the same is true for kids. If it ain't moving, they will not use it. So when we design for kids, we always try to make sure that something somewhere on the screen moves at all times. Even if kids don't interact with the thing that's moving, it will at least draw them into the interface and help them see what they're supposed to do. Now, the same is true for adults, but to a lesser extent. An adult will get really annoyed and frustrated when things start moving on their own without purpose. But if you integrate this movement and this action into the experience, it can lead to greater engagement and satisfaction. But you have to be careful and tread lightly on this one. Let's take a look at an example for kids. This is a great app that we're going to look at now. It's called Endless Alphabet, and it teaches letters, words, and reading to kids. And one of the great things about it is that after you choose a word, the letters start twitching and moving so that you know you can play with them. And this action informs kids of what they're supposed to do. Let's go ahead and check it out. Pay attention to how the letters keep squiggling even after they're in place. And this makes the app feel more alive, and it keeps kids engaged for long periods of time. So I chose the word artistic. Here come the little monsters. And then all the letters, as soon as I touch the letter, it starts jiggling around. And then after it's in place, it still pulsates a little bit. And you'll see after all the letters are loaded in, they all carry on and start doing their little routine. Whoops, I missed the S there. They just don't stop moving once they're engaged. So it lets me know, and it lets kids know that there's something I'm supposed to be doing. And there they go. So that's an example of how you might use the concept of action, or the concept of action in use for a child audience. When we think about designing action for adults, we know we have to be a little bit more subtle, and we know that there are specific circumstances when this will work better than others. I don't know if you're familiar with the Star Walk app, but it's beautiful. It's an astronomy app, and it has action down to a science. But the action and the movement is quiet and soft to let the users become immersed in the content that's being shown to them. Let's take a look, and you'll see that it keeps moving. The app keeps moving no matter what I do. What Star Walk does is it finds your location, and it shows to you the constellations above you, and it points them out, and it highlights all the different stars and elements that are right in the space above you. See how it just keeps moving no matter what I do? I love how it uses action to share the mystery of the stars and the solar system. And this is subtle enough for adult audiences, but it completely draws people in to a subject that can feel a little bit lofty and academic. It's very well done. So let's take a look at some examples of when you would use action effectively for an adult audience. I bet you knew that slide was coming, right? So for things like first-time use, you hear a lot of different schools of thought on whether or not you need to have a tutorial for more complex apps or sites, or whether or not a tutorial is a cop-out for incomplete or bad design. But I think there's a way to integrate the concept of action to highlight where things are on a screen for first-time use and what users are supposed to do with the elements on the screen. So not tutorials per se, but little visual indicators drawing users' attention to those important areas. Another opportunity to use action effectively is for contextual or on-screen help. So once you've gotten past the first-time user experience, you might, as someone continues to uncover and figure out what they're supposed to do within an experience, highlighting key behaviors, highlighting key areas of the site via action is really an interesting way to showcase that. Can everybody hear me okay? I know you're not going to be able to answer me, but I just give a shout out if you can hear me.
We can hear you, Deborah.
Okay, thank you. My slides aren't advancing, so I just wasn't sure if you could still hear me. But good, I'm glad to hear that. Let me try this slide again. There we go. Another opportunity for using action is through browsing or discovery. Whoops. So when a user is browsing, or when you're designing an experience that requires browsing or discovery, or if you're leading a user through an experience to find something or to uncover content or products or functionality, it's always interesting to include action so that people understand where it is they're supposed to go and what path they're supposed to take. Now, you wouldn't necessarily want to use action for routine tasks that people have to do every day, like email or calendaring tools, because this can get in the way and slow people down. Moving along to our final topic, the topic of flow. We're going to talk about this in a moment. You'll hear people say, oh, we don't need flow in a kid's app, right? Kids love nonlinear experiences. They don't want to be constrained. They want to choose their own path, and they want to have a free-for-all and do whatever it is they want to do. Well, false, false, and sort of false. Kids like to have freedom, but they also love constraints. They don't want to feel out of control in an interface or an environment. So flow is really important. It can't be a free-for-all, and because kids, like adults, need to feel as though they're progressing through an experience. Three components to flow that are important to keep in mind when you are designing are choice, progression, and achievement. This ensures that your flow isn't too prescriptive, that it still allows for some freedom on the part of the user, but it still shows that there is a linearity and that there is a trajectory through the experience that your users are intended to take. Let's go ahead and take a look. A great app available for kids today is Sophia the First. Sophia is a princess, and she's actually geared towards slightly younger kids. And she's a little bit spunkier. She's a village girl whose mom marries the king, and so she becomes a princess. And this app is great. It has a lovely flow and a lovely sense of progression, especially in its puppet theater, where kids can actually make their own puppet shows using characters from the show. It's procedural, you'll notice, but it gives kids choice within each of the steps. And then the achievement is creating a little movie at the end that they can save. Let's take a look. So you'll notice here that I get to choose my characters, my backgrounds, my music, my props. So even though there's a flow here, it is giving me some choice within the flow. Here I'm selecting my music. And then when I get into the actual puppet show, I can arrange the characters any way I want on the screen. I can shrink them, I can expand them, I can position them any crazy place I want. So that even though there's a procedure here, and even though there's a progression, I still get a lot of choice in terms of creativity. Then I can record the video. Here are my characters floating around. I can do whatever I want with them. And then ultimately at the end, my achievement, my accomplishment is watching this video that I've created on my own. It's great. It's a great app for kids who like to engage in pretend play and make their own shows. An example of flow for an adult audience is a great app called Biblion Frankenstein. This is a product of the New York Public Library, and it's absolutely unbelievable. You can navigate through literary criticism. You can read the book itself. You can access commentary, essays, news, current events, anything relating that might possibly relate to the Frankenstein novel. And although it's nonlinear, there's a wonderful curated flow to the whole thing. It gives users choices and allows them to progress through the path they choose within the experience. Let's go ahead and take a look. And the way they've implemented this concept of flow is absolutely beautiful. So you'll see when we, whoops, sorry about that. You'll see when we take a look that when you first start the app, it gives you many options. You can choose, and then see how it flows you through these wonderful this covered art, this cover display. You can select, you can use text, you can use images, and it gets you right into the content that you've curated for yourself in a meaningful way, giving you that choice, giving you that sense of progression, but following a path, at least a loose path that's already been established for you. Really, really well done. So what are some ways, or where are some opportunities for us to use flow effectively when we're designing for adults? Some interface types that really lend itself well to incorporating flow are tracking. So when you think about tracking food, tracking exercise, any type of tracking app or site or experience that is designed for behavior change lends itself perfectly to flow and narrative because you're making those choices, you're progressing, and your ultimate achievement is that change in behavior. For example, the Weight Watchers app is beautiful. It lets you go in, it lets you identify the foods that you want to eat or have eaten, and it lets you add them to your tracking list. Tracking food and exercise can be really tedious, but if the flow is right and it allows for that level of choice, it can be a really compelling way to communicate that. Any type of program that allows for creation, so any type of photography app or anything for art or design, even scrapbooking, any type of curation or collection or creation lets you customize, picking your favorites, customizing your options, etc., is really nice for flow because, again, there is a linearity to what it is you're doing, but building in that level of choice and building in that level of control is lovely. So even though you've got that flow, you can still have some freedom within it. There are some really interesting implications for weaving the idea of flow into search paradigms as well. When you think about facets, when you think about exploration, when you think about searching, what am I looking for and why? And how do we support that behavior so that users get what they want? Jared Spool refers to this as the scent of information. And when you think about the idea of flow, that's exactly what it is. How do you move people ahead within an experience when they're looking for something in particular to get them to that next stage and to get them to finding what it is that they need? When we think about the idea of communication and we think about the idea of flow, this is an example of where you wouldn't want to get too prescribed in terms of what it is that users are doing in terms of flow. If you're designing any type of communication tool, you want the conversation really to be between two or more people. The story, the narrative is inherent in the interface and the actions of the users itself. So you don't really need or want to impose any type of flow on a communication tool or interface. I think we have time for some questions. That's all I have. It was an absolute pleasure presenting. I apologize for any delays. And just a concluding thought while we gather the questions together. I think what we've learned is that there is a difference between designing for adults and designing for kids. Of course there is, right? Kids and adults are different cognitively, emotionally, and physically, and as such they have different needs. But if we think critically about these needs, we can find a way to use some of the interaction patterns that we use for kids to making adult experiences more interesting, engaging, and satisfying. Thank you very much, and I'm ready for questions.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Deb. That was great. And we definitely have some questions for you. And
Excellent.
We're going to start with one from Kathy Grace, who is asking if you can show or at least describe some examples of flow with regard to tracking.
Absolutely, Kathy. That's a great question. It's funny, I actually worked in the weight loss industry for a brief period of time in my life, and we focused on these types of interactions. So when you're thinking about a tracking application, when you're thinking about tracking exercise, for example, you can give people the parameters they need to follow. Give them the structure. So ideally you would be exercising 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. And then give them choices to pick within that framework. So find out as much as you can about the user. So, hey, you're 26 years old, you weigh 240 pounds, and you want to lose 70 pounds. So here's what you would need to do, and you're just beginning an exercise program. So here are some activities that would be right for you. So frame the flow from the perspective of the user. Let them go ahead and pick those activities that are applicable to their situation, and giving them that choice and helping them see the progression through the selection of those activities, and then the result, the achievement, is when they actually accomplish it. So you want to make sure that what you're proposing to them and what you're letting them choose from, really they do they will very likely be successful because it is within the realm of possibility for them. So apps like MyFitnessPal do this. I think there's some opportunity for improvement from an interface perspective of MyFitnessPal, but they do a nice job giving users that choice, helping them find exercise and foods that are right for them depending on where they are.
Great. Well, thanks, Deb. Here's a great question from Frank Desamini. How important is audio as a response for kids that can't read? And can visual feedback solve this or help here?
Frank, that's an excellent question. Audio is pretty important, but it's not as important as we think. So I've seen some kids' apps that just make a ton of noise for no reason. When you're designing an app for kids, especially for kids who can't read, the audio that you use has to communicate. It has to work extra hard to communicate, right? So it's not going to just be a matter of putting some cool sounds up there. Your sounds have to have meaning. If a kid gets something right, play a little da-da. If a kid gets something wrong, you can play a little wah-wah message. But the right combination of visual feedback and auditory feedback is really important. I'm not a big fan of voiceover, maybe a little bit in the beginning if you feel as though your app needs additional instruction. But kids aren't great listeners as it is. They tend to be wanting, especially the younger ones, wanting to jump right in and start playing. So I would limit the amount of voiceover content that you have and focus on the key sounds that are really going to lead the kids through the experience and show them how to play.
Okay. Question from Andrew Smeek. And sorry, Andrew, if I mispronounced your name, and to all of you who I might mispronounce names for. Andrew asks, what's your opinion on error handling for kids versus adults?
That's funny that you mentioned that. I was actually just talking about this the other day, Andrew. So error handling is a tricky thing. What you'll find with adults and with older kids too is that they will actually read any instructions that you provide. Maybe they'll skim them, but they'll get a feeling for what they're supposed to do, and they'll know if they've done something wrong. Younger kids are not like that. Younger kids will jump right in and just start messing around. So what I like to do with error messaging for kids and adults is to teach through them. So if the password field says put in 8 digits, including a special character, a number, and a capital letter, you don't read that. You go ahead and just type in whatever password you normally use for all your accounts. The message will come up and would say, nice try, but you have to follow these rules. So using error messaging to teach as well as to inform is really important. That's a concept that we use a lot for kids. It's not a concept that we use a lot for adults. But it's really important. When I worked at a large cable company for a while, and we had a whole system in place letting people download and both stream and download shows. And it was a really complicated process. And we agonized over the instructions. And we put them up, and we checked them, and we tested them. And what we found is that nobody was reading them. People were just going in, skimming them, and just trying their best to get it to work. And we broke up that set of instructional text, and we put it into corresponding error messages so that users would get that instruction as they needed it, as they were going through the system, setting it up and making mistakes. So I think that's an effective way to handle error messaging for both kids and adults. If you're talking about kids who can't read, you can, again, use audio for that. But ideally, in any type of interface you're designing for non-readers, the rules wouldn't be constrained enough for a kid to actually make a real impassable mistake.
Okay. Gina Moronic writes or asks, do you have ideas for good ways to use action or other feedback for showing when people are off of the happy path?
Yes. So when you say off of the happy path, I'm assuming you're not just referring to an edge case, but actually deviating from accomplishing their goal. What you can do, and it's sometimes hard for a system to know when someone is deviating from that happy path because it's hard to know intent. But if you do, you can put in little pointers or little tiny animations to kind of guide people back to what it is that they're supposed to be doing. So whether it's a form that they're supposed to be filling out and they're not doing it, or something that they're supposed to be clicking that they're not clicking, you may need to rethink your design, but you also can put in a little alert or a little animation or a little throb or something to get people's attention so that that gets them back on track.
Okay. Question from David Anderson. I don't think I mispronounced that. What the outcomes in terms of user satisfaction were. If so, where would I find it?
That's a great question. So I assume that you're looking for research around these principles specifically and how they impact user behavior from both a child and an adult perspective. I don't have any offhand. Most of the stuff that I'm citing here is through experience as well as through existing sites or apps that I've seen work positively and get accolades from the greater community. I know for a fact that things like the engaging Twitter interface where you pull down to refresh, that little bit of friction has increased usage and awareness. And that paradigm has been used also on Facebook. So there's some patterns that we're seeing in social media that are working. As far as kids, there's not a whole lot of empirical research done around kids' apps and what's effective and what's not, unfortunately, which is part of the reason that I wanted to write this book for Lou. But we have a lot of assumptions about what we think works for a child audience based on where they are cognitively and physically and emotionally. And a lot of it is based on that. But as far as longitudinal or long-term empirical studies, I don't know of any.
Okay, fair enough. Question from Rainer Rustenberg. When using music for adults, is there a line for that? I'm not totally understanding the wording here. When using music for adults design, is there a line for that when loading the site? By no interface. I'm sorry. I thought I understood the question. Rainer, maybe if you could reword that, we'll try that one again and come back to it. So let me go on to another one. This one from Dave Love. Do you have any recommendations for game development platforms?
Game development platforms. From a technical perspective, I don't. I know that Mr. John Ferrara, who is another Rosenfeld author and an expert in the game industry, he has a lot of great suggestions, and he is on Twitter at Playful Design. Eric Zimmerman is also a great resource. He has written a number of books on game design. He probably has some recommendations that you can find just by searching for his name. Let me think of who else. I think that should give you what you need. I'm sorry I don't have any more information about that type of technology. Okay.
I mean, your answers are fair and honest because a lot hasn't been done yet in terms of answering these questions.
Yep.
So, I mean, we're at square one in many respects. We have one more question. We'll have time for more if anyone wants to jump in, but we have one more remaining that we know of, and it's from David Anderson again. How large is the standard deviation in user opinions in adults in terms of how much friction is fun?
I wish I had the answer to that question. I don't. I hate to say that you'll know it when you see it, but it is the kind of thing that you're going to have to test, and it is the kind of thing that's going to differ from experience to experience and from user group to user group. So if you're designing an application for, let's say, what are some of the things that we talked about when we were talking about friction? If you are designing an app that will allow users to add things to lists, like if you're designing a real estate app, what would be the right amount of friction? I don't know. You would have to do research with people who are looking for homes or looking to buy property and see what they respond to. You can use your design sense to tap into what would be an effective use of friction. So whether it's a dragging functionality or some type of gestural interface to add stuff to your real estate list, you may feel as though that's perfectly appropriate. You may test it with people looking for homes, and they might be like, I am so stressed about finding a home. I don't feel like engaging with this. I just want to be able to put in my parameters and click go. So I think it's going to be one of those it depends cases where you have to really know your audience and know the product you're designing and understand what the goals are across the board.
It depends. My favorite answer for every user
I know. I knew you were going to call me out on that there, Lou.
Sorry?
I said I knew you were going to call that out.
Okay, well, I think that's it. That was the last question we had, and I want to thank you all for your fantastic questions, and we're going to finish a few minutes early, which is amazing considering it was a great presentation and we had great Q&A. One note that the recording should be up for today's session in about 48 hours or less. Just keep checking the O'Reilly page that you registered at. I imagine Yaz will put in a detail in the chat window so you can find out some of the specifics on the recording. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Deb for presenting this great webcast and sharing her knowledge.
All right, Lou, are you still there? Oh, folks, it looks like we may have lost Lou. No worries there.
We'll get him back. We'll get him back.
We will. And actually, we do have just a couple more questions that did come in. So, Deb, we still have a few minutes. Let's just get those answered here. Question from Bruce. Is there any such thing as a fun sign-up experience?
Yes, there is. There is a great virtual world called Poptropica. And their sign-up experience, I think adults would find it a little tedious, but the way it progresses, it uses ideas of friction and flow, in fact. It makes the whole selection mechanisms really interesting. It's not standard form completion, but users get to choose their gender, they get to make their character, they get to enter a little bit of basic information about themselves in a really fun and interesting way. I don't know if I can pull it up here to show it to you, but it's Pop, P-O-P, Tropica, TROPICA.com, all one word. And if you go through the sign-up experience there, you'll see that it's quite interesting. As far as sign-up experiences for adults, I haven't really seen any that I've enjoyed or appreciated enough that's following these principles. What? Hello?
Oh, go ahead and finish that. It's just Lou.
Okay. Sorry, hello. As far as any type of engaging sign-up experiences for adults, I don't see any that really rank in that same level of creativity in terms of the flow and the friction in a meaningful way. The Poptropic is a great example of one for kids, and there's principles in there that you might be able to leverage, that you would be able to leverage for an adult audience.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. We do have one final question here. This one's from Andrew. What design or method are you using to divide child's area from the parental controls within an app?
That's a great question. Parental controls and parental consent and all that good stuff is really important. But there's nothing worse than designing an app and having a parent section and having a kid get there by mistake and, hypothetically speaking, be driving down the road and have your child in the back seat say, "Mom, I can't get out of this. What do I need to do?" And obviously not being able to reach back and fix the app because you're driving. What you want to do is you want to make the parental section clearly accessible, but you also want to keep it out of the way of curious fingers. So kids, especially younger ones, are predominantly thumb-based. They don't have the fine motor skills that adults and older kids have. So when you're going to be focusing on gestures for kids, things like swiping and grabbing versus pinching and pulling, you want to focus on those gestures. And when you're designing a parental experience, require a little bit more fine motor skills to get there. So keep that section separate. Position it probably closer to the top of the screen because kids are more concentrated on the bottom of the screen that you're designing if it's an app for an iPad or any kind of tablet or phone. And keep the parental section at the top and keep it a little bit out of the way. And you can even hide it with a little parental icon that when you click on it, it expands and gets you to that area. Excellent. I hope I answered that question.
Let's see, anything else? All right, folks, and with that, we're going to say a very big thank you to you, Deborah, for being with us today and for presenting just an incredible webcast and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Great. Lou, I don't know if you're still there, but we appreciate you participating today and for hosting today's event. And folks that attended our webcast, we thank you for attending and hope you've benefited from it. A couple things I want to let you know about before you close out. please open your group chat if you didn't, because there is some information in there to save you some money today on Deborah's ebook, and that's a thank you from O'Reilly Media. You can save 50% on her ebook today, Designed for Kids. Information there in your group chat. As well, we did push out the link to Deborah's publisher, Rosenfeld Media, if you want a copy of the print version. So again, open that group chat, information in there on Deborah's book to save you money and to get you the print version. Folks, we hope you will join us tomorrow. We are hosting another Rosenfeld webcast. This one is going to be with the Design for Care author, Peter Jones. So you don't want to miss that. You can register for free and learn some more design tips and good information there that can really help you with your day-to-day. Folks, this will conclude today's webcast. Goodbye, everybody.